Welcome to Live Free. I'm Angela K. Austin. Together, we'll discuss books, we'll explore the world, and we'll do it with some of my closest friends. And hopefully, we'll make new ones along the way.
Hey everybody, this is Angela K. Austin, and I am here with Saritza Hernandez. Say hi, Saritza.
Hi, everybody.
All right. So, Saritza is a literary agent. And as a self-published author who, like every other self-published author I know, of course, I have tried the traditional route. I haven't done so probably in about, I don't know, maybe close to 8 years or so, maybe a little less than that. But I used all the tools that everybody can imagine. You know, you get your Publishers Weekly, your Writer's Digest. What's that big book called, Saritza? Publisher something. It's a book that comes out every year. And it has like every single like publisher.
Yeah, the writer's market.
Yeah, that's it. I bought that sucker. I got like a whole stack of those things, like for 12 years or something, but, so when I reached out to a friend of mine, Savannah Frierson. Hey, Savannah. Shout out.
Savannah.
And I was like, Savannah, I did a Facebook search on literary agencies. Because I wanted to interview a literary agent. And when I did the Facebook search, actually Saritza's former agency came up. And I reached out cold to the agency like, hey, I would love to be able to interview, please somebody respond to me, and but then I went to the website and started looking at the authors. And my friend's face popped up. I'm like, wait, hold up. Let me use my tribe. See, this is why tribes are so important.
Very important.
Very important, because Savannah was like, wait, let me reach out to my agent. And that's what brought us here today. So thank you, Savannah. And thank you, Saritza, for joining me today. And what I really want to do today is talk about what it means, one, to have an agent, talk about that process, talk about what that looks like. But before we get into all of those details, let's tell people a little bit about you, Saritza, like why you do what you do as a literary agent, how long you've been doing it, when you were with your former agency and as you transition on, like what are those genres that you even look for and things that you like? So
yes.
Let's talk a little bit about you.
So I have been in the industry for, it'll be 18 years in September. I have been a literary agent for 8 years, actually 10 years. 8 years of those were at my former agency, Corvisiero. I started out at L. Perkins with Lori Perkins when I realized that there were no agents representing marginalized voices in the digital publishing era. We were starting to have ebooks being published, and I saw that a lot of my friends who were queer or were people of color or both, we couldn't find publishers to publish our works. And they were going to like these small presses who had these horrible contracts or didn't even have contracts. And they were basically signing away their rights and signing away all of their opportunities for the future. So I reached out on Twitter and said, hey, I would love to learn more about being a literary agent and what does it take? And Lori Perkins reached out, and I have been an agent remotely for my entire career. I am proof that you do not need to live in New York City, that you do not need to have, a parent or a family member who works in the industry who can get you in. It's possible to do it. And we need more people of color on this side of the table who are representing the authors and helping them through every step of the way. So my genres, I started out primarily working with romance because that's my jam. It's my passion. Whenever I'm having a bad day, I pick up a romance novel and I'm good. But I love science fiction. I love cozy mysteries, thrillers, especially horror novels. So I started branching out a couple of years ago into those genres. And my list absolutely grew because of it. So now I get to rep authors that write in all the different various genre fiction categories, which is a lot of fun. But I also found that I love YA voices. And so I now represent also authors who write YA. I tell people, if you want to know what my brand is, go look at my client list and it'll tell you what I stand for and what I believe in and what I fight for. My list is 90% people of color, 100% people marginalized, and that intersection, you know, everything and every intersectionality. So it's been a lot of fun to do that, including my client, Savannah, who got to connect us together. And I appreciate her for this.
I think, you know, it's so interesting when you say, you know, these, your client list is 100% marginalized voices and that intersectionality. Because, you know, when I started this whole podcast YouTube thing, that was one of the things that I was talking to a lot of people about. And just even reaching out to other author tubers and other authors and looking for opportunities to partner, because I do believe in that intersectionality, you know. So how do we all work together to help uplift these voices that are usually, you know, maybe one or two people are plucked out, made mainstream, but you don't have like as deep of a pool, you know, so that you don't have as many varying stories. Because it's like, usually when it's somebody plucked from the margins, you know, from the fringes, usually it's kind of like the same story almost retold, because they found, oh, this is what people are interested in, so let's just keep telling that story because it's safe. So, like, you know, we don't need to veer from that. It's success, right?
Exactly. And we get a lot of that, you know, it's frustrating, but it's also like a good opportunity to push back when I get responses from editors who say, well, we already have a book like that. We already have a book about that. The that being the, you know, community that is marginalized, whose voice has the one book at the publishing house, right? And so you can have 20 books about, you know, young white girls going to high school and, you know, finding love, but you can only have one book about a Latina doing that, or a Black girl doing that, or a Muslim girl. And so, or a gay boy, like having the one doesn't mean that you're being, you know, that you are opening up to these voices. It means that you're still saying, we allow a limited opportunity for your voice to be heard. And it's good that we have more literary agents of color that are now pushing against that and saying, okay, but because you have the one book, here's another voice that can amplify. Here's another opportunity for that audience to see themselves in your, you know, list.
It's really interesting, because and I'm not going to get it right because it just popped into my head as you were saying it, but there was a young Black girl I remember who, maybe over the last couple of years, she started a book club. And she said she started her book club because when she was in school, and she's like a middle grade student, she said because when, you know, in school, every book that they were assigned to read was about a young white boy and his dog. And so I've forgotten what she called her book club, but it was because she wanted to find books by people of color that were books for her age group, that she could start this book club and make these recommendations. And so it's just, it just re-emphasized to me, because I felt that way when I started writing romance. Because I would read these books, and honestly, Saritza, I remember finding various books that I would like when I was younger, and I would reread the sections that had people of color in it. I'd be like, oh, okay, it's 2 pages, and I would read the whole book, and then I would go back.
You got one with 2 pages? That's awesome. There were times you could barely see us on the page.
I know, right? But it's hilarious. I swear to you, I would find books I like, and I would just reread the sections that have people. And then, and, you know, and as I grew older, you know, and you know, I may have shared some of this with you before. I can't remember, but you know, I graduated from HBCU undergrad with radio, TV, film production, and so I started thinking more and more about it when I was taking my various classes. Like, oh, I would love to do this, and I would love to do that. And I remember telling people, oh, yeah, you know, I think I can write, I can submit, and I can do this. And then you do, and then you get kind of discouraged. And, you know, one, you have to grow, and you have to be at a certain place with your own writing to be able to tell a story.
Correct.
And you also have to be able to promote yourself and push. You know, I remember trying to like learning how to do elevator pitches and learning how to write a synopsis. And you're like, oh, Lord, you know, you just
Yes.
you're like, ah, you know, because it becomes so scary and it's so daunting, you know. And then I remember, because I would write to the publishing houses, I would submit as they, you know, required. I would submit to the literary agents. And I remember the time when I started to get, when you stop getting the form letter, thank you, but no thank yous, and you start to get the rejections that had handwritten comments. And now for people who have not submitted yet, let me just break this down for you.
Yes.
There are a crap ton of people writing in this world, and agents and publishing houses receive a crap ton of submissions.
Yes.
And usually they just send you back some thank you and no thank you kind of a response that somebody is just copying, folding, and sticking in something, or you're just getting a bounce back email. Whoever, however you get it is thank you, no. But when you start to get those rejection letters where somebody has gone through your manuscript, made little notations, or people have told you to revise and resubmit, it's like, oh my God, I'm being validated. Yes, I'm a writer, you know. But it's just, you know, it throws you so much, and you keep trying because you're looking for that agency, that publishing house who really sees you, who really understands who you're trying to be as a writer, who's really trying to help you get that out there. But when you start to get those, you're like, you do feel slightly validated that it's not all in your head.
That's so good to hear.
You know,
I think from a, you know, and from my side of the table, when I go through those, one of the things I'm very cognizant of is, and I think this is why we need more literary agents of color to, you know, be in the industry, is that we're very cognizant of how the messaging is received by the author when they are a member of a marginalized community, when they are a person of color, when they are queer, when they are questioning, and they're writing something that's very personal and very, you know, we all write what we know, right? We all write what we feel comfortable expressing, but a lot of us that are in a, you know, people of color in our communities, we share our communities, we share our joys and our pains in a very different way than what the heteronormative, white, cisgender, you know, middle-aged woman or man might expect because of their preconceived notions, because of how they, you know, perceive our communities, right? So when they start to respond in rejections that say things, I couldn't connect with the voice, I couldn't, or they give you comments that say, you know, maybe we should tone this down. They don't realize that the wording, the word choices could be, you know, a microaggression, could be something that perhaps it wasn't their intention. And I'm going to go on the side of being hopeful that it wasn't an intentional misstep, as most people hopefully are learning, especially right now.
Especially now, yeah.
Right, but now we're more careful about when we respond to when we reject a work, regardless of what the author's you know, identity is, because a lot of the times we don't know. It's just a name on a manuscript, and a lot of times it's a pen name. A lot of the times there's very little information. You know, some of us use Query Manager that allows for people to put their picture up there if they want. Not everybody does that, and it's not required, and it shouldn't be. That's the other thing. It shouldn't be. The response should be global. So how do we make those responses a little bit more open and honest without microaggressions and without coded messaging? And I think that saying things like, putting questions in the manuscript and saying, how do you feel about this word choice in exchange? Or is this something that, am I misunderstanding what the intention is here? I love that you have this community of people in your story. How are they a part of the main character's growth? Because that helps you to understand, well, and especially in Latino communities, I can only speak to us, but our communities usually have families that are multi-generational, that either live close to each other, live in the same house. And a lot of the times we don't always refer to them as grandma or grandpa or abuelo. Sometimes we mention them by name, and that's a cultural thing that needs to be expressed. And so if you're going to change that in the manuscript, then you're changing a cultural piece, and understanding it could help actually strengthen the work and help the literary agent also learn more about the community. But I think if we had more people of color on this side of the table that can push against those notes from publishers that say, can we tone this down? Or I didn't connect with the voice. A Black woman's voice is going to be different from a white woman's voice, from a Latina woman's voice, from a queer. So we need to be open to the fact that if we had more intersectionality in our industry, we'd have more color on our shelves.
We would, and it's like my head exploded with like 18 different questions as you were talking. But, I have had that, like you say, that whole intersectionality, and if there was more diversity and more whatever on all sides of the table. I've had editors. I'm from the South. A lot of people in the South, tend to have two names. They go by their two names.
Yes.
I have a book that I'm working on right now, and my editor kept crossing out the middle names. I'm like, no, because that is how they refer to themselves. That
Correct.
character's name is not Kelly. Her name is Kelly Rose.
Yes.
So stop changing her name. So, it's like that whole thing, not only in this world of publishing houses and not only in this world of agents and whatnot, it's like that editors, self-publishing. I remember one of the last times I actually tried to submit to a mainstream publisher, it was a publisher who was just starting. Well, not just starting, they've been around for a while, which is one of the reasons I reached out to them, because they were starting to be talked about and discussed, all across self-publishing and whatnot. And so I went to an event, you get to sign up and you're like, I would like to be able to pitch to this publisher and this publisher.
Yes.
So, you go to their events and you submit, you get the opportunity to pitch. And I just never forgot it, because the publishing house, I don't need to talk about names or whatever, but they were like, well, you know what? We don't know if we know how to market a book who has an African-American heroine. Yeah. And then they suggested that I go and find this other publishing house that they thought might be able to better manage marketing a book that had an African-American woman as the heroine. Mm-hmm. And it's like I went back and then I was like, well, because at that time, I think I was just almost amazed, because my master's is in marketing, my undergrad is in radio, TV, film. And so, at that point, I'm like listening and talking to, this person. I'm just like, it doesn't even ring true to me. Now, what I do hear is you saying that you don't want to. You don't want to market a book that has an African American, and what I do hear is that you feel like you don't need to, you don't want to try, but I don't believe for 1 minute that you don't know how or can't figure out how to do it. And I remember licking my wounds, going back to my friends and just feeling like, and then it was so weird because at this event, I ended up having to share a taxi with another author, one that I didn't know. I literally met her at the event and we were taking taxis. And so I'm in the taxi with her, and she told me how she had just been signed by this company who told me that they didn't know how to market a book that had an African-American heroine in it.
Mm.
And she was, of course, white, blonde, beautiful, super sweet person. And she didn't know my story and my situation. But as she's sharing that with me, it was just like everything inside of me was like, you know, like
Yeah,
this is such an exhausting thing. It's an
yes,
exhausting thing. So
it is.
I immediately, when I saw that you represented my friend and I reached out to her and I saw, you know, your stable of authors, I was like, I definitely wanted to have this conversation with you because you know, I thought I could have a conversation with you that would help me to understand the
Yes.
thinking behind publishers and literary agents and, you know, just.
Well, I don't know that I can help understand in that regard, because I can help you understand just in the camaraderie of I've been there. I have, you know, I do push back against that. I think that a lot of us now, you know, literary agents across the board, not just those of us of color, although we've usually been the ones pushing back on our own, we're starting to see others kind of also pushing back on that and saying, but why don't you know how to do that? If you are a publisher and your market is readers, your market isn't a white reader in Kansas City, you know, between this block and that block. You wouldn't make any money. You know, so I've gotten that. I've gotten I've gotten the we just don't know how to sell this properly or how to break this out in a big way. I've heard that one, right? And I don't have a problem with that, because I understand that there are some publishers who feel that the work requires additional push from other departments that they're not getting. And that unfortunately means that the editor has to be the face for the publisher, despite them wanting the book. They have to say, it's out of my control. But the problem with that is for the editor as well, is that the sales team then needs to be trained. The sales team then needs to be diversified. It's great that you've diversified your editorial list. It's great that you've diversified maybe your senior management and editorial. But if the sales team is still a white male in their 50s, you know, working in the Bible Belt, they're not going to push the book by a Black queer creator. It's just not going to happen. And so I push on that. But yeah, and I think that we also push back on things like, you know, when they say, well, I had one tell me, we don't think that the book will sell if there's a Black man on the cover. And I'm, you know,
I've heard that a lot, from Black women to Black men to Black couples.
Yeah, I'm just like, well, that's not true. Because if you've ever picked up a book by Miss Beverly Jenkins, you see that she sells.
Yeah. Brenda Jackson, Beverly Jenkins, you know, like, oh my God, Terry McMillan, come on.
I mean, come on.
Yeah, B.B. Moore Campbell.
The difference is how they're being marketed. Again, it goes back to that. And so, yeah, I've had an editor tell me, this is not the right fit for us, but our digital imprint over there, they know how to sell that queer book really well. You know, you should definitely go there. I'm like, it's your imprint too. Like, why can't you do that? So why does the queer book only get digital distribution, but the straight love is okay on the shelf? What kind of messaging is that?
You know, one of my closest friends is a gay male, and he writes male romance. And he and I talk about it often, in that there are certain houses that he could submit his work to. And he, you know, he's tried both traditional as well as digital publishing. And so right now he's with one of the smaller houses, but I think like one of the more, one of the stronger ones at this time, because so many of them have shuttered, you know, so the places where he can submit become fewer and fewer.
And
And,
fewer.
and he and I talk about that because it's like, because I tell him as a Black woman who is, writing heterosexual, I find it difficult, so, and I mean, I wrote a book that had a male to female trans, and I would see these reviews that were talking about how gay this was. It's too gay, it's too gay, it's too gay. And I'm like, how does he contend with that? That was a sub-story, a subplot in a book that I wrote. And I had a digital publisher who helped me get that book out there. And it's one of my favorite things that I've ever written in my life. But it was attacked so much. And I'm like, when it comes to having very few channels of distribution, even in the self-pub indie world, when you get hit and you get attacked on so many different sides in so many different ways, it does make you start to limit kind of some of the stuff you do. And I still consider myself to be a bit of a radical because, at the end of the day, I'm like, I write this because I want to write it because it's a story that I feel like is true to my heart. But it blows my mind when he and I talk about stuff and I see the reviews and I look at his books and I'm like, he submits and he can't, I'm like, this is the battle that so many people who are people of color and, like you say, fringe or marginalized, it's like, what do we do? How do we continue to submit and get our voices out there when there's so few people? Well, when I feel like there are fewer and fewer people willing to help us tell those stories, which brings me to the question. One of the first questions I want to ask you is, how do people find literary agents who are willing to be their champions, to help them get their stories told, to find the houses who are willing to take a chance on those voices that are not the regular mainstream voices?
Yeah, I would say, obviously, I always say things like, well, Google is your friend, but sometimes not. So I am very aware of that. I would say the very first place I would go to is if you're on Google, type in literary agents of color. There's a Tumblr that has all of us listed. It's become a directory. And I highly recommend that you curate that list first, especially if you're from a marginalized community and you are looking for someone who's going to be in your corner, who can not just champion your work, but champion you and your career. Because the other aspect of being a literary agent is that we don't just work book by book, although some agencies do. Many of them work career-wise. So many of them focus on the agent having a relationship with the author for a long term, so that you can brainstorm with your agent about the things that you want to write in the future, because they know the market and you know what you want to write and what you can write. They also can help with coming up with narratives that you think can be that could be strengthened for the commercial aspect of the work. So let's say you have a story that you have seen has been getting a lot of, Alexa's talking to me, I apologize, that has been getting a lot of attention from editors saying, this is too close to another book we have. The story is too close to another book we have. Well, having an agent that can say, okay, I see that in the romance industry, we've got several very similar stories. This is how we push that. With what's happening in the market right now, let's make it a conversation about the intersectionality of race in this intercultural romance. Or let's talk about, maybe age it down. Instead of making them in 19, make them 17 and in high school and dealing with the romance. As a person of color or a queer person of color, falling in love with their best friend or with whatever. There's ways that you can have those conversations with someone who can push that voice forward too when they go to the editor and say, this is why it's similar but different and or better. you know?
That's interesting. I never thought about that. I mean, I guess maybe when I've done those elevator pitches, I thought about it a little bit, because it's like, oh, this is, you know, blah, blah, on steroids, or this is whatever, and this,
Right.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So, you know, but I never thought about the literary agent. I never thought about having the literary agent who is truly, truly, truly your partner, to where they would fight for you in that kind of a way, to where they can become that champion and, like you say, amplify your voice. And because they know that market, that specific niche that you're writing within, they can help you with those tweaks so that you can actually get it heard by that. Yeah, I
Exactly.
never thought
I
about that.
mean, that's the role. That's one of the roles. You know, one of the questions that we've talked about before is, what is a literary agent and what do they do?
Yeah.
Well, that is part of what they do. They sit on your side of the table with you at the negotiation with the publisher, but they're with you from the beginning. They're with you from the time that that manuscript has been approved by them, you know, that they've fallen in love with it, that they couldn't stop reading it, immediately contacted you, wanted to know more about how you came up with the story, wanted to, you know, go into this business with you. Their job is to make sure that you succeed. The first and primary responsibility of a literary agent is as a fiduciary responsibility to the author. We need to make you money. We don't get paid until you get paid. That is the way it works.
Responsibility. I like that one. You broke out a big A word there, Saritza.
There you go.
Fiduciary
I also,
responsibility.
girl, I teach I teach at UCLA too, so you know you got to use those big words in the college courses.
I like it.
But no, I mention that because I think we forget that sometimes, that the agent works for the author. We are there as a way to support and to help grow, and that's why there's also you know, a lot of turnover in on our side of the industry, because it is very difficult for people of color to work as literary agents, because we do not get paid until you get paid. It is a commission based only in career. And so if that's the case, and you are having to work a full-time job to, you know, put food on the table, but you have a passion for getting voices and championing voices of people of color, of queer, of marginalized communities, you understand that you're going to be working more for less in the beginning, but in the end, it ends up becoming a huge opportunity for everyone, because you are amplifying a voice that can help amplify others. The Dong Wan Sung, one of the literary agents that I absolutely adore, he mentioned in a Twitter post once that we need to remember to send the elevator back down when we've been able to move up. And we forget that. We forget, you know, we always have those images of someone holding their hand out back and, you know,
Yeah.
let me bring you with me. And that's all good, well and good. And don't get me wrong, I love that imagery too. But I like the idea of the elevator, because so many of us are not even allowed the chance to see where the elevator is. And then by the time we get to the elevator, there's so many people in there, we're not allowed in. So when we do get in and we get to go up and we get to move up, we need to remember to send it right back down, because there's a bunch of people who are in line right behind us who need that opportunity too. So yeah, it's you can look for us online, but I strongly recommend Literary Agents of Color. I believe it's now literaryagents.com, but you can just put that in and Google it. It'll, I think the first hit will be that Tumblr directory, sorry, that gives you all of our information.
I'm definitely, I'll look for it, and I'll put it in the description for the podcast and for the YouTube channel so people can find it. But I just have to say, I love that imagery of the elevator, because I'm one of the people who always talks about, you know, helping the next person, so you can, you know, don't shut the door behind you. Like, kick open the door, open a window, make sure that somebody else is walking in behind you. And I actually have an interview coming up with Miss Beverly Jenkins, and she talked about making the path wider, you know, for the next person, so that, you know what I mean? And so I love all of these different things that people are sharing and talking about when it's like, make room, help out the next, do whatever, so that you are not the only voice at the table. Because,
Exactly.
I mean, one, doesn't that has to be exhausting. If you're the only person at the table and you have to represent every dynamic of your group that you represent. If I'm the only Black woman at the table, well, there's a whole lot I don't know anything about. You know, I'm no longer in my 20s. I can't tell you what it's like to be a woman. I was like, I'm not married. I've never had one child. There's so many stories I can't tell you about, you know, that if I'm the only one at the table, I'm not even doing justice to the stories that need to be told. But if I continue to do whatever my platform allows me to do, if I continue to do that, then that gives the next person. And, you know, and then I was listening to someone speak on something the other day, and they talked about that. No matter who you are, you have some sort of a platform. If that's you and your 10 family members, if that's you and the 20 people who live on your block, whatever it is, you know, so, you know, do whatever you can to be able to help in whatever that next opportunity needs to be. And as we can see right now and all the things that are going on in the world around us, you know, when it comes to people of color, there's so many more stories that need to be told, so many more voices that need to be heard, because we wouldn't even be, you know, I'm of the opinion, we wouldn't even really be in this position right now if there were more people listening to the voices, you know, of people of color who had stories that needed to be told, you know, because I think back to the movie If Beale Street Could Talk, which was based on, you know, James Baldwin's book.
Yes.
And, you know, man, at the end of that movie, I knew, because I know Bald. I'm like, I'm gonna be mad. I'm gonna come out of this movie. I'm not gonna be emotionally proper. I knew it. I knew it. I knew it before I even went into it. So I was like, I swear I sat there, watched every bit of the credits, and I sat there for like 15 minutes after the movie ended. Like, it's just like, Lord. You know, but those are the stories that people are forgetting, you know, Harlem Renaissance and things like that. You know, they're forgetting why Maya Angelou ever existed, or Zora Neale Hurston, or, you know, Langston Hughes. They're forgetting why those people existed, because they were people who were trying to make a path, because there were stories that needed to be told and voices that needed to be heard. And then you fast forward from that period to now, and you can see again, where voices, you know, need to be heard and stories need to be told from so many angles, you know?
And I would say that the new Renaissance is all of the new voices that we're getting in the industry right now that are just, to me, as relevant and as important as our classics. I read Giovanni's Room, I remember, in junior year, and it completely changed my entire life, like an entire perspective on everything, because that was also the very first book that I read that was by a person of color, with a person of color on the cover. And because it had his picture on the cover, and that's that I read, you know, If Beale Street Could Talk, and then I read, you know, Go Tell It on the Mountain. Like, I just went, and then I went from him to Richard Wright, and I mean, it
just go deep.
And I remember like not wanting to come out of there, because I had been looking for books that were other. You know, I didn't see any Latinas on the bookshelves. There weren't any, especially, you know, I'm in Orlando, Florida, and I came here as a kid. So in the libraries around me, all of, you know, the very first book I read in English was, you know, Laura Ingalls, which, you know, not really good for
like Little House on the Prairie.
Like that one. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, like that one. But yeah, so I remember reading that and realizing that those voices were so rich, and there were things that I could easily understand, and as a person who, you know, was raised in the barrio. I still live in the barrio, you know. It's like there's so many things that I could see my community and the people around me in those books, and it took me until I was in high school, almost college, to find them. And now the voices, I think, of our new Renaissance, of our new You know, we've got Kwame Alexander, you know, we've got Ibi Zoboi, we've got Angie Thomas. I mean, come on. We've got these voices that are coming out now with the messaging that kids get to pick up and see themselves and see their life, and it not be just about Black pain, not just be about the struggle, be about that plus the life, that plus the love, that plus my family, the community, just existing. Like how beautiful. So I'm excited.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I talked with Beverly Jenkins about, because I was like, one of the quotes that I had heard her say before was, you know, how can she, I can't remember exactly how it went, but it was something akin to being able to talk about the pain of the history of the Black experience in America, but being able to tell or talk about love and hope and desire around that. You know, and all races, all voices, all, you know, sexuality. There's so many stories that need to be told from that kind of a perspective, I think. Not just the pain of the existence of whatever that is, but the life, the living, and the loving of it. You know, it's like, you know, it's like it, you know what I mean? Let's not just get stuck in one part of it. And let's get a little uncomfortable, you know, so that we can enjoy these other elements of it. Because, you know,
because I think it's time. I mean, how many years have we had to read outside of our experience and be uncomfortable in those moments too, when we're reading about things that, you know, we just don't necessarily relate to because it wasn't our lived experience. I think it's fine for others to now experience other communities, and be uncomfortable, sit in your uncomfortableness. One of my favorite, I can't remember the full line, but Maya Angelou, one of her poems talks about that, you know, how she's been made to sit in her discomfort. And so for me to ask you to sit in your discomfort for just a moment will never equal the amount of time that I've had to, but just sit with me for a while. I'm like, yes. Exactly. How is that?
And that's all. That's all. Thing? That's what our country is doing right now, is sitting in their uncomfortableness for a minute. It's only been 2 weeks, people. It's okay. You know, sit in it for a minute. But that's one of the reasons why, you know, I had made this decision a few years back, because I only read stories by women who look like me, or by authors who look like me. If you didn't look like me, I was like, you know, do I want to read that story? And so I made a conscious effort a few years back to read stories from people who didn't look like me. You know, I wanted to read men. I wanted to read people from other countries. I wanted to, you know, actively seek out, you know, people who are like interesting stories, and not the classics, because we've all read the classics, you know. My undergrad was, you know, like I said, reading TV film. I, you know, graduated from a high school that was top tier at the time that I was there. So I'm used to that. You know, you read all these classics. So not that, but read contemporary stories by authors that were from voices that were not mine, because I wanted to open myself up and be exposed.
Exactly.
You know? And so it's like, and that's the thing, like I recently interviewed Adriana Lisboa, who is a Portuguese author. And she and I talked about, you know, like I was amazed, you know, I was just like, I'm talking to Adriana Lisboa, you know, like let's get deep in this, you know. But then I saw how my own limited view, because I was like, it must be amazing to be you. It must be amazing to be this Brazilian author who was loved and respected and just, you know. And then she hit me. She was like, you know, yeah, but people only want to hear Brazilian stories from me. You know, they only want to hear about the XYZ, and I was like, you know, I never thought about that, you know, because they found a story that works with her. Right. And it works with her voice. And they wanted to continue to hear that story told from her in that way.
Yeah.
You know,
the comfort is there.
Yeah, you know, they were holding her down instead of allowing her to, you know. So, I mean, so honestly, you know, it's not only that we want to hear all these different voices, but we need to hear them from different places so the people telling the stories don't feel like they have to tell the same story over and over and over again, because that's the only way they can succeed. So I don't know, it's just amazing. But before, we get even deeper into any of that, I want to jump back really quickly when you were saying that literary agents get paid when we get paid. So let's talk about some of those specifics a little bit. So what does a contract with a literary agent actually look like? Like tell us more about that.
Well, every agency has a different way of managing their representation. Some agencies, which I think are rare nowadays, do it on a handshake, which is not recommended. But I would say, the vast majority of the agencies have an agency agreement that the author gets to sign with the agency. You sign with the agency and with the agent. What ends up happening is when the agent offers representation, they'll say, I'm going to send you our agency contract. Please take a look at it. Let me know if you have any questions. Please ask questions. Please, negotiate it. If there's anything in that contract that you don't feel comfortable with, and the things that should be there are ways that you will communicate. How the agency works with commission structure is, it shouldn't be more than 15% that the agency is receiving from selling the rights to your work for the primary rights. Sub rights might be, how do they work with sub rights? Do they have like another agency that they work with to get your book sold in translation, to get film deals, to have audiobooks? All of that should be specify the amounts, what the commission structure is going to be. And then it should also specify things like where the agency actually sits, because the state laws mandate, certain things. So you want to understand, if the laws in Virginia are going to be very restrictive to some of the work that you want to do, you want to know that ahead of time. If the agency is sitting there, is that going to keep them from doing something? I'm not saying that that's the case. I just think that that's an important question. Other factors that are usually included in the agreement include things like how the communication will be outside of, just a submission. So do you want do you want to receive communication about all of the rejections, or want to just find out that the book is on submission? Do you want a list of that? There's also information about, sometimes they have it as an agent contract that's per book. They'll say, we're going to sign this book under the agency, and then if you want to do another book with us, then you will add an addendum to the contract. It's not always the case. I think I'm seeing more agencies now using a career approach, like I mentioned earlier. And so they'll say on the contract, any books that you submit to the agent will be considered as part of agency representation, and anything you don't, you get to do with whatever you want. You want to self-publish it and not have to worry about the agency commission, great. But if you feel that's a book you want to maybe send to Penguin Random House, and you can't do it without your agent, then that's what you send to them. It usually also includes things like indemnity clauses and stuff like that. That's, basically to protect the agency from any kind of legal recourse they may have to take on your behalf. Ask questions. I would vet also the agreement with, like, the Authors Guild. You can they offer it as part of a membership. Being a member of the Authors Guild allows you to have your contracts reviewed, and they'll give you, it's attorneys, literary attorneys, who can give you information about it. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of information, but that, I would say, those are the most important pieces, at least that I think of.
So with the literary agent, is it that, like you said, each book can be submitted, and it'll be under that contract. So is the contract then for a specific amount of time of representation, or a specific number of books?
Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes, that's true. It's not, so there's no real like term to an agency agreement. Most of them allow you to leave the agency with either a 30-day notice or a written, make sure that I tell this to every author, that your publishing contract and your agency contract have a get out of jail free clause. You know, how, if things don't work out, how can we part ways without, you know, getting the courts involved? And because that's important, you know. Some people are with their agent longer than they are with their, you know, married partner. So you want to make sure that if that isn't going to be a good relationship, or you need to go somewhere else, that you can leave without, what happens to the books that are under the agency? That's also included in the agreement. If you leave, what happens to that book? What happens to my commissions? How do I get paid? What happens to, you know, my representation if my agent decides to leave, or something happens to my agent? You know, God forbid they pass away while you're being represented. What happens to you? That's all usually spelled out in the agreement. And you can ask that if it's not there, that they, you know, stipulate it, that they actually add it to the contract.
Okay, that was always one question that I had. So, like, if I sign, you know, would I be with this agent for 10 years? What if I don't like the agent, or if the agent doesn't
Right.
like me?
Or if
You know, it's
opportunities
just like,
become better. You know, I've had clients that, you know, we've parted ways when we realized that the work that they wanted to work on was not something that I could properly represent. It wasn't something I understood well enough. I didn't know the market, or I just didn't feel comfortable representing it because it was completely out of my experience. So I'm not the right person to help them continue to grow. So the best thing is, let's part ways, and you find the right agent that can then take the next stage of your career further. And that should also be very much stipulated on how the contract happens. If you need to break up, how does that work?
all right, and that's like, and that sounds fair. It was always a curiosity with me, because, you know, even like I said, in the self digital publishing world, you get these contracts, and, you know, you're going through these contracts, and you're like, oh, wait, you know, this is how the royalties are paid, and this is how this, and this is how that. And of course, we all have the horror stories of digital publishers who've gone under, and they not pay their authors and stuff like that, which is really one of the reasons why now I primarily self-publish. But that was a curiosity for me. And I know we're running short on time, and I know you guys can tell that I could talk to Saritza forever. So I'm going to make sure I get this one question in here, because I know all of you guys are thinking about it. Saritza, how do people submit to a literary agent? So now we know where to go and look. We can go find this website and this Tumblr profile or Tumblr account, and go there. And there's, I'm sure, probably information there about how to submit to some of those people. But can you give us some general guidelines of kind of like what we should be expecting, or what kind of like what that engagement should look like?
Yeah, so, you know, depends on how the agency works. Some of them have emails that are specific for queries, and some of them have Query Manager, where you submit a form, and the form basically guides you through what they need. It tells you, paste your query here, paste your synopsis here. It tells you how much they're expecting to see, whether it's 1 to 2 pages, 5 pages. They'll also ask you, it'll also tell you in their submission guidelines at the website for the literary agency, it'll say, Saritza's looking for romance, women's fiction. You can submit by clicking here, attach, the first 10 pages of your manuscript. Don't give us more or less than we ask for, where there's a reason behind our madness. We ask for a certain amount of pages because we know we can meet that demand. Understand, like you mentioned earlier, agents and publishers get thousands of queries, and the query can, each query can take us anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes to go through it, depending on the type of work, whether it's nonfiction or fiction, and how much is there, how long your query letter is, and how long your synopsis is. Your query letter should be about 350 words. Keep it short, keep it sweet, keep it simple. I just want the main plot, the 2 back paragraphs of your book blurb. That's helpful to me. And a little bit about you. Don't make the query about you. The query isn't about you. You're a wonderful person. I'm going to get to know you when I fall in love with your manuscript. But right now I want to fall in love with your manuscript. So show me the baby first, and then I'll get to talk to mama. And I ask people to put in their query when they do their bio to keep it to like maybe 2 sentences at the end, just before your sign off, and saying things like what your platform may be. what, you've been a self-published author with, 30 books under your belt, and this title you feel is ready to move into a traditional, market. And that's enough for me. That's wonderful. That helps me know that I already know what the marketing pieces are, that your writing is, I'm expecting it to be nice and strong. And so I can dive right into the pages, that's the important thing. Make sure that if they tell you that the synopsis is 2 pages, that means usually 2 pages single spaced. Unless they say that, 3 pages double spaced, keep to the guidelines, even if it's a form, even if you think, oh, they're not going to know that it's more than 3 pages. We know. A lot of us are on our phones reading queries and scrolling. And if we're scrolling for a very long time, we realize it's more than the pages we asked for. Don't give yourself an opportunity to be rejected before you get to see the pages. And if you don't meet submission guidelines, which are at the agency websites, you're already shooting yourself in the foot, right? So don't, just kind of make sure you follow along. And the last thing I would say for your query to stand out is keep your query in like a third person, even if your work is in first person. Your query and your synopsis should be in third person. You're basically telling someone what the book is about, right? And you normally don't tell somebody about your story as if you are the main character. And if you do, you are going to be a lot of fun at parties after several drinks for me. But in the beginning, it's going to be like, I don't know what Angela's on, but I'm going to go and get some. So keep it to third person, keep it professional. It's okay to say things like, hi, Saritza, or dear Saritza. If you don't know how the agent identifies, if it doesn't list their pronouns, and you don't want to assume, and there's no picture, and you don't want to, misgender someone, simply keep it to the first name. Most of us are I would say 90% of us are completely fine with that. We prefer that than to be misgendered.
That sounds like some sound advice that maybe I'll even use myself. So before we say goodbye, 2 last questions. One, because you represent so many people whose voices may not necessarily be amplified on a grand or whatever scale, I would love for you, if there's any voices out there who are writing some great stuff that you think we should know about, are there any shout outs that you can do that we can just go and check out? And then lastly, I know you're in transition from A to B, but for people who just want to follow you and like, be prepared so they can like hit you up,
Absolutely.
tell us where we can find you on social media. So if you could just give us some shout outs and then tell us how we can find you.
Yes. So the shout outs, I love shout outs. So definitely I have to give a shout out again to my girl, Savannah. I love her women's fiction romances and her romances, erotic romance and contemporary romances that she writes. Definitely follow her. My other client, Cherish Reed, who writes beautiful contemporary romance novels that you just devour. And I love because they always have, that sexy, nerdy kind of, professor, librarian. You can't go wrong with those. So I definitely shout outs to them. I also want to shout out Adriana Herrera. She's a Latina author who writes people of color. She's written a male series, a queer story series that I absolutely adore. Check her out. Of course, the Dame, Miss Beverly Jenkins. If you are not reading Beverly Jenkins' historical romances, not only are you missing out on phenomenal writing, but you are missing out on the history that you did not get to learn in school. Because unless you went to, historically Black college, a lot of this history was not taught to you. So it's romance. So it's gonna have the good stuff and it's gonna have happily ever after.
Yes.
So those are some that are just off the top of my head. They're the ones that I automatically go to. And you can find me on social media. Pretty much I'm everywhere. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, and I'm on Instagram. On Facebook and Twitter, you can find me under EPUB Agent or just under my name, Saritza Hernandez. You can also find me on Instagram. My handle there is Saritza H. I look forward to letting you guys know what my next steps are. I'm right now in between agencies and looking to go somewhere else. So as soon as I find a new home, everybody's going to know. And I'm going to announce it on social media. So I encourage you to follow me.
Right? It's like everybody's going to be hovering, like waiting for that submission. They're going to be all like following you on.
I know, my query box is going to blow up.
You know, be prepared. Okay. So they're like, she needs new clients. Submit. It's like,
right? It's going to be crazy. I love it. I can't wait. I'm excited.
I'm excited for you. And then, I just want to take, the time to once again say, thank you so much for accepting my invitation. And Savannah, I love you. Thank you for connecting us, but this has been so helpful to me. And I think for so many people who are in the world of indie publishing, I hope that this makes it less scary for them, because even like with myself, I have to admit, I never really thought of a literary agent just necessarily being my partner, not in the way that you have, now shed new light upon that. So, thank you so much for, taking a little bit of the blinders off of my eyes and helping me to see agents differently. And again, I feel so honored that you took this moment to have this conversation with me, share part of your afternoon,
Thank you. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, it's been so fun for me. So to everybody in podcast land and on YouTube, this is Saritza Hernandez. I hope you guys will reach out, find her on Facebook, IG, Twitter, get in now. Yeah. Be first in line.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Saritza. I will talk to you guys, all of you guys again soon. All right. Bye-bye.